You're listening to the Down East Mike Podcast, the quirky little podcast from Maine. And now, your host, Down East Mike.
Dee-dee-dle-dee-dle, Good morning, everybody. This is Down East Mike of the world-famous Down East Mike Podcast. This is episode number 117, news and commentary for Friday, March 8th, 2024. I'm surprised we made it this far. In March is that whole in like a lion, out like a lamb thing. I think right now we're seeing March just kind of whimpering along. It's temperatures in the 50s every day, and we might even see the sun this month. Who knows? Our motto here on the Down East Mike Podcast is some of this is whimsy and some of it's true. The interpretation of it all is entirely up to you. We like to leave it to the listener's discretion. And also, just to get us warmed up a little bit, the Down East Mike Podcast contains absolutely no mean words, just wholesome goodness from Down East Maine, a historical, literary, auditory candy store. And we ask if you heard the bells on the door when you came in. Well, it's a mouthful. Anyway, good morning, everybody. In today's episode, we have Lee Iacocca trading in your Mustang for an Omni in 1979 on this day, March 8th. That sounds like a great deal, huh? We'll look at that story in just a second. We have food prices soaring on this day, 1979. That's a shocker, too, huh? And then on this day in 1892, the Democrats were winning all the Portland elections. Again, another surprise. And then we have Maine's biweekly bird. We have a bird we're going to be looking at today on the podcast, and that's coming up. Illness of the instant, it was more like the illness of the week or the month. And if you've got the illness that's going around, you'll know all about it. And Down East Mike doesn't have to tell you about it, but you might be on the lookout for that one if that illness grabs you. No birthdays today either. It's been kind of a downtime, apparently. Let's look at this day on March 8th, 1979. Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization called on the Palestinians under Israeli rule to confront President Carter with a general strike and demonstrations. PLO's 15-man executive committee at an urgent meeting convened by Arafat to discuss Egypt and Israel's conflict also called for a summit conference of Arab heads. They were just having a big to-do there in Lebanon and Israel, just like they are today, and that was on this day in 1979. That Lee Iacocca story. Lee Iacocca, who was dubbed the father of the Mustang when he was a top executive for Ford Motor Company, is making a personal mail pitch to Mustang owners to join him in switching to Chrysler Corporation. Iacocca, who became the Chrysler president 4 months ago after being fired from a similar position at Ford, sent letters to 550,000 Ford owners suggesting they trade in their cars for a Chrysler. And the Mustang drivers got this pitch. The car you now own is a good one. I'm proud to have had a hand in its development. However, it may now be time to replace your Mustang. If it is, I know you will find it to your advantage to consider the Dodge Omni as a superlative replacement. A 4-color brochure describing Chrysler cars is enclosed along with the Iacocca's personal business card. Present my business card to your Dodge dealer, and he'll show you every consideration, the letter said. So today, if you'd done the switch and you got an Omni for your Mustang, how would you be feeling about yourself? We also found on this day, there was a picture of, it's up in Millbridge, Maine. Despite a warning sign in state law, the Millbridge Town Dump was merrily smoking and burning Tuesday afternoon on March 6th. The dump is located on the east side of Route 1A near Beaver Brook. In other words, a place where they'd probably like to put condos right now. Millbridge voters appropriated $5,000 for the town dump landfill account during the annual town meeting the day before this picture was taken. There's a picture of it's kind of grainy picture, but a picture of the garbage burning there, the Millbridge Town dump, 1979. And those are interesting times. Everybody had a dump barrel out back, so if they were too lazy to take it to the town dump to burn it, they would just burn plastics and wood and metal and whatever they could throw in that barrel and make it smoke. They would burn it back then. Interesting times. On this day in 1979, the headline is, "Food prices continue to soar." Again, another headline we didn't expect, right? Food prices will continue to soar through March, and consumers will face sharp increases in energy costs, at least until the end of June. All forms of energy jumped sharply ahead in January, and the stiff increases can be expected to continue during the first half of 1979. Looking back, the council concluded that inflation worsened sharply during 1978, rising 9% at the retail level for the second largest yearly gain in 3 decades. Food and housing costs, which together account for more than 40% of the average consumer's budget, were the major factors in the steep gain. Then to the left of that story, we have a picture from Kentucky Fried Chicken. They abbreviated it to KFC. I think makes it sound more lightweight when you abbreviate something. And it's got a picture of tasty lunch at a great price, $1.90, available anytime. 2 pieces of chicken, mashed potato, gravy, coleslaw, and a roll. Everybody would fight for that roll. They used to chuck the roll on top to absorb the grease. 10-ounce cup of Pepsi Cola, or coffee if you prefer. What a great deal. That was at KFC 1979. Let's roll it back a little bit further. Let's go back to 1892. And the headline in the Lewiston Evening Journal, Republicans, as usual, got most of the mayors in the general election, and the Portland city government was captured by the Democrats. The long list of town elections in Maine, and they go on to list like where the Republican mayors were elected. It was Auburn, Gardner, Hollowell, etc., Bath. The Democrat mayors were elected in Lewiston, Portland, and Westbrook. And they note that a Democratic city government was elected in Saco, a great novelty, and the Saco Democrats celebrated the victory with great noise. Oh, I wish I could have been part of that fun. The Democrats have gained complete control of the Portland city government for the first time in 30 years. Another story on this day in 1892. Ground was broken Monday for the new power station for the electric road in Biddeford. It is expected the road will be in operation by the last of April or the 1st of May. Remarkable times then in 1892, where we had the electric trains going throughout the state, either being put in place or already underway, and unfortunately we've gone backwards since then. Some of the community notes: Samuel Gould of Eastbrook. We like the names more than anything, but the good old-fashioned. Samuel Gould of Eastbrook has rented the homestead of the late Captain Isaiah Worcester. Another community note here: the Hancock roads are perfectly bare in some places, and in other places it's impossible to go with a carriage on account of the snowdrifts made by the recent storm. Now, locally here, our snow is almost all gone, although we do still have some banks here and there. The harbor coasters, which were harbored at Hancock for the winter, are still in port. They note the funeral services of Captain Alfred Ford, who died on the 3rd of March of pneumonia. They were held in the church at Lemoyne. A story about Deacon Stephen Dexter, a very aged man of Corinth, was thrown from a sleigh, fracturing his hip. And folks, I guarantee you I'm not going to be thrown from a sleigh anytime soon, and probably you're not. Corinth roads are badly drifted for the first time for the winter. Another note from Corinth: the snow of Thursday was piled in huge drifts in many places in Dresden. I think we've got a long-winded story here. This is interesting, though. Fernley Montague. all about his suicide and his Portland life. I think we're breaking our rule about no bad words, but it's an interesting story. Fernley L. Montague, the artist, who shot himself and wife in Washington, Maine, on Sunday, as reported by Monday's papers, was well known in this city, Portland, Maine, and had lived here several months in the winter for at least 4 different years. He always stayed at Howe's boarding house on Pearl Street. His character and life were singular in the extreme. He was born in England 60 years ago of a family of more than average prominence socially, and that claimed relationship with the Earl of Warwick. Earl of Warwick, I can almost see the velvet jacket there. His father wished him to become a clergyman, but his inclinations were so strongly artistic that he ran away from home at the age of 18 and went to India, where everybody goes. For the next 30 years, his life was a roving one. They make him sound like a dog or something. He traveled all over the world almost, supporting himself by his art. Now, what is that? When you support yourself by your art, are you leaning on a painting? But about 12 years ago, when he was 48 years old, he met in Australia a young lady of 18 and married her, and it was a case of love at first sight. He first saw her up in a tree, into the lower branches of which she had climbed. She was a granddaughter of Tom Hood, the poet. Although there were 30 years disparity in their ages, they were a very loving couple, and their life, full of ups and downs, was very romantic and happy. They traveled together throughout Asia and California, and they were both eccentric and enjoyed unique experiences. On one occasion, they journeyed in an ox cart from Los Angeles to Omaha. Who hasn't done that? Camping overnight wherever they found themselves. Today they do it in a van. They call it hashtag van life. Back then it would have been hashtag ox cart life. Of course, when he was not wielding the goat stick or frying pan, he was at work with the brush and palette. He revisited his old home in England once and saw a tomb erected in his memory, since his relatives believed him dead. For several years before this tragic death, both he and his wife were, as far as they knew, without living relatives. The last time he was in this city was a year ago last fall, the city being Portland, Maine. He complained then of terrible headaches, which were so severe that his face would grow purple and he would become almost delirious. He told his landlady then that he was afraid he was going crazy and that if he did, he should shoot himself with a pistol. As an artist, he was a genius in but one direction. His black and white pictures were very fine and commanded enormous prices. He sold one of them for $3,000. He sold one to the Corcoran Art Gallery at Washington and several to congressmen and one to Bob Ingersoll. The writer has sent a letter from the great atheist which Mr. Montague had when in this city. The writer has seen a letter. He was astonishingly extravagant and improvident, and although occasionally very flush when he'd sold a picture, he was generally very hard up for money. His waste of money was remarkable. 4 years ago, having sold several pictures, he paid $3,000 for 2 violins, and he and his wife endeavored to learn to play upon them. The next time he came to Portland, he bought 6 beautiful accordions, and in the dead of night the other boarders had occasion to utter protest against this man of his hobbies. Another time when he came to Portland, he brought several very handsome and expensive rifles and shotguns and pistols. Both he and his wife were accustomed to practice a good deal with a pistol. This guy's just nuts. His wife was pretty and pleasing, but quite as eccentric and improvident as her husband. In all practical affairs of life, she was like a little child. On one occasion, she had purchased a piece of beautiful silk plush from which to make a garment and brought it home and showed it to him. He draped it tastefully over her shoulders and told her that she must wear it that way and that it would spoil it too much to touch it up with scissors. And she did wear it upon the streets of Washington, a square piece of plush draped over the shoulders. Montague owned a small piece of land in the town of Poland in Androscoggin County and used to live there in the summer in a rude cottage. The walls of several houses in this city, in Portland, are adorned with his black and white pictures, and they certainly are very beautiful. Those who knew him here are almost inclined to believe the report that it was with his wife's agreement that he shot her and then himself. Doubtless his illness was such that there was no hope for him, and being wholly without relatives, he preferred to die with him. Probably no other two people in this country had had less experience in the practical affairs of life or led such a butterfly existence. We should look up Montague's paintings and see if they're still available today. Let's see. We got another story here. This is out of the Chattanooga Times. I think this was from their Snake editor. It was a filler piece, but we're going to read it anyway. And the subject headline is "A Queer Creature Dead." Mason Evans, the much-paragraphed wild man of Monroe County, Tennessee, is dead. The fatal grip took him off. Evans had been a great curiosity in this section for more than 40 years, during which time he had roamed in the woods, apart from the comforts of civilization, subsisting on roots and herbs dug from the earth, with an occasional fowl surreptitiously taken from some convenient barnyard. In other words, he stole chickens. He was captured several times, but always managed to escape, as wild men do. 7 or 8 years ago, he was captured by some fearless fellow with an enterprising turn of mind for the purpose of entering him in a dime museum as the Wild Man of Borneo. There are so many wild men of Borneo that we've seen over the years. When taken, his body was as hairy as that of a bear and covered with filth and vermin. His eye gleamed like the eye of a maniac, and he had almost lost the power of speech. For 20 years he lived in a cave of the Chilhowie Mountains and was never known to have spoken a word during that time. He lived in a state of nudity and was fond of raw meat. Those who know his history say that he was born in Monroe County near Hiwassee College in 1827 or thereabout. He was of a good family and received a splendid education, and at about 20 years of age he was engaged in teaching school. In the meantime, he fell in love with a handsome young lady of his neighborhood. She received his attentions with apparent favor, and one night he called and asked her to become his wife. She said no. He went out into the darkness, and it was many years before he was seen again, and then he fled from his fellow men like a frightened deer. Mason Evans, the queer creature, dead. What other stories do we have from 1892? Los Angeles physician told us the other day that the most trying time in all of his experience was during the past 5 weeks when he stood hopelessly by and saw a ranch man near Puente die by inches of what is known as progressive paralysis. The patient was first affected in one big toe. In a short time, the limb was paralyzed to the knee. 2 physicians were called, and all the known remedies were applied to stay the progress of the deadening attack, but in vain. Hour by hour, death moved on its victim. The patient was propped up in an armchair and fully realized his condition. He awaited the end with the coolness and bravery of a martyr. As the line of death crept nearer and nearer his heart, he made calculations as to how much longer he could live. He said, "Now it has reached the body," indicating the exact place with his finger. In a little while, he said, "It has reached the bottom of my lungs." Another short wait, and he said faintly, "It has touched my heart." And he fell over dead. That's a wonderful story. How about this one? An electrical parcels delivery van, 1892, constructed by a London electrical company, is a compactly designed vehicle upon 4 rubber-tired wheels. It's driven from a seat similar to that of an ordinary van. Imagine that electric delivery vans. Switches are used to act the motor in operation and to apply the brake, while a vertical wheel and endless worm are revolved to change the inclination of the front axle and thereby the direction of which the vehicle travels. The motor is worked by accumulators of sufficient power to run from 2 to 4 hours and at a rate of 6 miles an hour. It is claimed that the use of electricity over horsepower will show an economy as compared with horse traction, and the company will immediately put the van to exhaustive experiments upon the London streets as a parcel cart. It will carry about half a ton of goods. That was a story out of the New York Telegram. Isn't that something? They had an electric vehicle, delivery vehicle, that would run about 2.5 hours, 6 miles per hour back then. How we doing on time? We're doing pretty good. Let's see. We'll do this one about it. It's a shark and a whale. On the trip to Fiji and back over the steamer Ovalu, just concluded, Captain A.W. Cameron and his officers saw a strange encounter. The steamer was going along at about 10 knots in mid-ocean when a commotion was observed in the water ahead, and the body of a huge marine animal or fish with what appeared to be great dippers was to be seen rising and falling. Captain Cameron steered direct for the stranger. On approaching close, the commotion was found to be caused by a whale over 30 feet long fighting with a thrasher shark. The latter apparently was having the best of the combat, and as the whale kept on the surface of the water comparatively quiet, the shark ever and anonymously threw itself out of the water and brought its tail down with a terrible blow upon the whale. The Ovalu was so close to the animals, which were too much occupied to heed the vessel, that either could have been touched with a pole. The captain could not stop his ship long enough to observe the result of the conflict. Kind of wonder if that was actually a killer whale, not a thrasher shark. Doesn't sound right. How about Mr. J.W. Thompson, Main Street, Lewiston? He has a remarkable flock of 15 Plymouth Rock hens. During the months of December and January, the 15 of those hens laid 270 eggs. That's a remarkable record. That's a lot of eggs. All right, it's time for the Maine bi-weekly bird. Today, we want to look at the shearwater. It's an off-sea bird. Puffinus, which is a Manx shearwater. There are a number of species of shearwater. There's actually about a dozen species of long-winged oceanic birds. They fly real low to the water, their wings spread out. Typical shearwaters are classified in the Puffinus genus. They are 14 to 26 inches in length. And the common name shearwater describes the bird's habit of gliding on stiff wings along the troughs of waves. The name is sometimes also applied to the skimmers, but that's an unrelated bird family. The shearwaters nest in burrows on offshore islands and coastal hills in the North Atlantic. They're found also in the South Atlantic, Mediterranean, and throughout most of the Pacific. The colonies may number hundreds of thousands of pairs, and at night, when the calling adults move in and out of the burrows, the din is deafening. I probably won't hear that anytime soon. A single egg is incubated in turn by the male and female, and the chick is raised by both parents. They're great rangers in distance. One was transported in a closed container to a point about 3,400 miles from its nest, and it returned to the nest in 12 and a half days. Before it leaves its nest, the chick is deserted by its parents, and they retire to molt at sea, as parents will do. This begins a starvation period which may last a week in the smallest petrels, 12 days in the medium-sized shearwaters, and considerably longer in the largest species before the fledgling goes to sea. When deserted, it is well feathered and fatter and heavier than the adult. It needs a period of thinning and exercise before it's capable of flight. After days of fasting and wing flapping, the shearwater may become airborne one windy night, especially if it's hatched in a burrow on a gale-swept mountain height from which it can flap and glide to the sea. Calm weather is its enemy. Many island-born young tumble down to the sea, too heavy to take off again in still air. They are expert swimmers, and they can dive deeply to avoid attacks by aerial predators. Rapidly paddling away from the dangers of land and soon gaining flight, the young shearwater will set off along a traditional migration route alone and unguided by the long-departed adults. Driven by an innate impulse to keep flying, it reaches winter quarters that it has never been to before, often at surprising speed. One Manx shearwater, banded in Wales as a fledgling, traveled 6,200 miles to southern Brazil in about 16 days. Allowing half of each day for resting and feeding, this is equivalent to an average speed of 30 miles per hour over the period. a remarkable achievement for a bird just out of the nest. So you're probably not going to see a shearwater from the shore too often. You have to get out in the water a little bit. And they've tracked them for years back when the Bluenose was running between Bar Harbor and Nova Scotia. They would every year go out, make multiple trips and do bird counts, and they would see thousands. They would record 2,000 of shearwaters in one day out there. So once you get out into the Bay of Fundy a little bit, those shearwaters would be very prevalent. They estimate they live about 56 years. They may live that as long as 56 years. They're the longest living bird that we have in Maine. Breeding pair discovered in 1973 in Massachusetts, but I don't think there are too many. There's like one breeding pair, Matinicus Rock, in 1997, a nesting burrow there. So but they're somewhat rare breeding in this side of the Atlantic. Let's just jump to the forecast, and then we can set you free on your Friday. For today, it'll be sunny with a high of about 47. We'll take that. Maybe it'll dry things out a little bit. For Saturday, mostly cloudy with a high near 41. And looking at Sunday, we got some rain with a high near 39, maybe some snow coming in overnight. And then as we go through next week, temperatures back up in the 40s and 50s again. So all in all, not a bad forecast for this time of year. Until next time, this is Down East Mike, wishing you and your loved ones a day that is full of grace, love, and kindness. We'll see you. Walk into the room, the table set for two. There's always room for you, well, everybody's beautiful tonight. Everybody's dancing here and feeling alright. Everybody's beautiful tonight under an artificial moon. Clear away the table, chairs, making room for dancing, making room for all that little care. Watching them slip away, everybody's dancing here and everybody's beautiful tonight. Everybody's dancing here and feeling alright. Everybody's dancing here tonight under an artificial moon. Everybody's beautiful